Hi, I'm Zibby Owens, and you're listening to the award-winning podcast, Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Please sign up for my newsletter at zibbyowens.com for weekly updates about my podcasts, events, and more. Also, follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens and also at Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. And finally, join my virtual book club called Zibby's Virtual Book Club, which meets every other Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time until 3 p.m. and features half an hour of book club discussion followed by 30 minutes of Q&A with the author whose book we've just discussed. You can sign up on my website, zibbyowens.com, under the virtual book club section, or even on Instagram under the link in my bio. I hope you'll find me in all these different channels and enjoy this podcast. I am thrilled that this week's sponsor is Audible. Audible, if you don't know, is the leading provider of spoken word entertainment and audiobooks, ranging from bestsellers to celebrity memoirs, news, business, and self-development. Every month, members get 1 credit to pick any title, 2 Audible originals from a monthly selection, access to daily news digests, and guided meditation programs. They also have everything like stories.audible.com, Audible Sleep. They have expanded Audible originals. I recently did an Instagram Live with Cheryl Strayed about her Amazon original story called This Telling, which you should definitely listen to. And it's awesome. It's just great. I use Audible all the time. Every time I take a drive, I download another book, whether it's Jill Biden's book to prepare for her episode or what did I do recently? Kim Brooks. I just downloaded Small Animals, Parenthood in the Age of Fear. That was great. I listened to Peace Medi's book, which was fantastic. It's called His Only Wife. Anyway, Audible is great. I definitely would not be able to keep up with all the reading that I do without it. And you get to use my special code, audible.com/Zibby. And it's so audible.com/Zibby, and you get a free month of Audible. So go check it out and use it wisely and use the time while you're walking your dog. Oh, that's another time I listen to Audible is when I'm walking the dog across the park. I listen to Jenna Bush Hager's whole memoir doing that, and many others. So thank you, Audible, for being a sponsor. And everybody else, go to audible.com/Zibby and download a book on me. Okay, Alice Hoffman's bio is like several pages long because she has done so many amazing things. But I'm going to read you the condensed version. And if you want the longer version, go to alicehoffman.com and you'll see why I can't read it all. It'll be like my whole episode. Alice Hoffman is the author of more than 30 works of fiction, including Magic Lessons, the prequel to Practical Magic, which just came out, which is what we're mostly talking about today, The World That We Knew, The Rules of Magic, The Marriage of Opposites, Practical Magic, The Red Garden, the Oprah's Book Club selection Here on Earth, The Museum of Extraordinary Things, and The Dove Keepers. She lives near Boston. Welcome, Alice. Thank you so much for coming on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. I feel like I should call you Mrs. Hoffman. I have like so much respect for you. I feel bad just calling you Alice.
Yeah, no, please call me Alice.
Well, I'm delighted to have you on my podcast. I was actually secretly thrilled when you followed me on Instagram. I was like, oh my gosh, Alice Hoffman's following me. So anyway, it's a thrill. So welcome.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
And congratulations on your latest book, Magic Lessons.
Yeah.
At this point in your career, do you even get excited when a new book comes out? Like, what's it like when a new book comes out when you've already written so many books?
I more get anxious than I get excited because if you're with the book by yourself for so long, and then it goes out into the world, and it's kind of like sending your kid to school or something like that. You lose control, and you don't know how people are going to like that kid of yours. And so, and then once it's out, then it's fine. But it's just more like those, the week before the week of its first being out there, it's anxiety provoking.
So do you feel any better at this point? Are you like calming? Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad I caught you on the down. Would you mind just telling listeners a little more about Magic Lessons and why you chose to write a prequel to Practical Magic at this point?
Yeah. Well, I wrote Practical Magic, the original book, 25 years ago.
Right.
And I never intended to write any more about that family, but I kept getting notes and letters from readers that they really felt like it wasn't enough, that they wanted to know more. But instead of going forward in time, I'm more interested in going back in time. So the first thing I did was write a book called Rules of Magic, which took place in the 1960s, because that's kind of my era, and it was like a pleasure to write about it. And then when I thought about writing another book, because I kept getting letters, and I thought, I really wanted to see how the family originated. I'm always interested in, I guess there's a theory of like ghosts in the nursery. those
Mm.
relatives that you've never even met that influence everything about you and your life. And I wanted to go backward in time and see who the first Owens woman was.
Wow. And by the way, my husband and I listened to this. Well, we started listening to it in the car together, and our
Oh,
last name is Owens. And when and so
was that train
it
set?
started the narration, and we were looking at each other like
I don't know, maybe you're related. But I have
maybe.
to say, the recording is great at Sutton Foster, who I'm a huge
Yes.
fan of hers. She was in Younger, and she's just a great theater actress, and so it's a wonderful recording.
I just had Pamela Redmond on my podcast who wrote Younger. So it's like all coming full
Oh,
circle.
really? Oh,
Yes. Yes, it was an amazing recording and very captivating. The drive flew by.
okay.
So that's why but why write it now? Like, why at this point? Like, you could write any book, right? Like, what's it like when you sit down and you're like, what's my next project going to be? How come you arrived at this today?
I don't know if I think about it that way because I have like a list of projects.
Okay.
So things that I'm interested in doing, books that I think I'm going to write. So it was kind of sitting there. And I just thought I had a lot of fun writing Rules of Magic. So I wanted to get back to that. I kind of wanted to escape. So I felt like this book could be an escape for me as a writer. And I think it is in some ways for readers. This is such a difficult time. And I felt like I wanted to go back to this other time and escape into magic and escape into this family. But as it turned out, a lot of things that had happened in the 17th century had a correlation to what is happening right now in terms of how women are treated and the idea of strong independent women being feared. And also I didn't realize it took place during and after the plague in England. And so as I was writing it, it was just very strange that the world seemed not that different.
I was helping my daughter study for an American history test last night, and I was reading through the things, and I was like, actually, this is very similar to the Black Lives Matter movement that's going on right now. I'm like, there are protests like across the street. This is what they did then. And anyway, it's funny how things sort of ebb and flow in cycles.
Really do. It was really interesting to me. But also the whole idea of the Puritan mentality. I mean, the Puritans were the ones that started the witchcraft trials here, although there were witchcraft trials all over Europe. And the idea that women were kind of at the root of all evil. It's kind of the idea of Eve bringing evil into the world. And it was really kind of shocking, their whole philosophy. And a little bit scary because there's a little some of that happening right now.
Yeah, I was going to say that's not completely gone, I would think,
No.
from some people's, imaginations or whatever you want to call it. And why do you think witchcraft? I understand what you're saying about women in general, but what is it about the sorcery, like the witchcraftiness of it? I mean, you have like lists of ingredients and what all of these things do, which you must have researched, I'm assuming.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right. So like, what is your fascination with it?
I have always been fascinated with witches. I mean, I was a fairy tale fanatic as a kid because I felt at that point when I was a kid, I felt like it was the literature that spoke the truth in a very deep way, an emotional truth that other children's literature didn't at that time. I still think it's the most deepest psychological literature, especially when you're a child. But I feel like witches, they are the only female mythic creature. They're the only mythic creature with power. And I think that's why, as a little girl, I always wanted to dress up as a witch. I always wanted to read about witches. I just felt like they had power.
Well, there you go. It's funny because I never really thought of witches in such a positive way until this whole experience with you.
Well, good. Yeah, and I think the idea of midwives and healers, I mean, I think that's all kind of under the same label as witch, that women who do things they're not supposed to do. And I thought it was so interesting that during the plague, that women who did herbal remedies had a bigger success rate than doctors, mostly because they washed their hands. And that was just kind of so interesting to me.
That is interesting. It's something I try over and over to teach the kids, I mean, this is like of the moment, the most important thing. What about like mediums today? Do you feel like they're in the same family as the witch, or you think it's like witch adjacent, or?
I think the witch is more mythic, more nature, has more to do with like kind of green magic, nature, herbs, healing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how I kind of perceive it. But I have to say, like in fairy tales, I can't remember the exact statistic, but something over 90% of the fairy tales have girl heroes, which is very unusual in folk tales or in any story, really. It's that in fairy tales, the girls are the ones that figure things out. The girls are the ones who are kind of at risk. And I always feel like they're cautionary tales, like the stories your grandmother would tell you, to beware of certain things and to know certain things.
Speaking of at risk, let's go back in time to your career trajectory here. First of all, can you just tell me a little more about how you got started? I mean, I know I've read about it, but if you could just tell me the story of how your passion for writing translated in such a unique way into becoming a writer.
Well, I never thought I'd be a writer. I was a reader. So I was a fanatical reader, but I was a secret writer, as I think many people are, especially girls. So I had, stories and notebooks that I never showed anyone. And then when I was about 16, for some reason, I wrote a story and I sent it to Esquire magazine. I had never seen Esquire magazine. I just heard of it. I'd never read it. And I sent them a terrible story about the end of the world. I didn't use any capital letters. And I got back a handwritten note from somebody who said to me, you should use capital letters and grammar. But also, if you have another story sometime and you're not kidding around, send it to us. And I was in shock. It was kind of like this thing where suddenly I was in touch with the outside world, and someone at this mythical magazine thought I was a writer. So I think that stayed with me, and I kept writing. I never intended to go to college. I lived in a very working class world, and I started going to college. I went to night school, and then I applied to. My brother lived in California and said there was a really good school out there. I should apply, and then I could move to California. And I'd never heard of the school, but I applied, and it was Stanford, and they gave me a fellowship, and I had a great mentor, and it just totally changed my life. I mean, I feel like sometimes you have this one teacher that just changes everything, and my teacher was Albert Gerard, and he sent my first story to City College, to a magazine that they had called Fiction. A friend of his was the editor, and it was published, which was a shock. I mean, there's no money involved. I don't think people became writers to make money or anything back then. And after the story was published, I got a letter from a very famous editor named Ted Solotaro. And he said, "Do you have a novel?" And I wrote back and I said, "I do." And I started writing it that day really fast. And I think that's why I'm a fast writer, because I just felt, I don't know if this guy's going to keep his job or what's going to happen. I better write this novel fast because no one's ever going to ask me this again.
Wow. So how long did that book take you?
6 months. But it was terrible. It was terrible. But he helped me with it. And in the end, he didn't take it, but he sent me to my agent. And I feel like it was just, it was luck, but also every time somebody opened the door, I walked through. And, I didn't say, I don't know, I don't have a novel, or it might take me 2 years. I just felt like this is my chance and I'm taking it.
That's great. And you don't have the same agent, do you?
She was my agent until she passed away.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, she was my agent for, I think, 40 years.
Oh, so sorry.
I was really lucky. She was great. Her name was Elaine Markson, and she was an amazing agent.
I also noticed you started the Hoffman Center for Breast Cancer Research. Is that right? So I just wanted to find out more about why you started that and what that whole initiative is about.
Well, I'm a breast cancer survivor of 25 years. And when I was being treated at Mount Auburn Hospital, which is a Harvard teaching hospital, a small hospital, they didn't have a breast center. So while you were waiting for radiation, you'd be sitting next to someone who had broken his arm, or once I sat next to Gina, my wonderful dog groomer. It's just like there was no privacy. And I think when you're going through treatment for that, you need something special. So when I finished my treatment, I asked some of the doctors over there, what could I do? And they said, let's start a center here. That's what you can do. So for 25 years almost, maybe it's more like 20 years, we've been doing an event every spring with where writers come and read, and we have had incredible writers, everyone from Amy Tan to Celeste Ng to just so many amazing people who have given so generously of their time and created the state-of-the-art breast cancer center. So I'm really proud of being involved with them.
I want to get on the list. Put me on the list for the benefit. That sounds great. I'm obviously, as we've discussed with my love of books, I'm sort of a sucker for hearing authors talk, and I never seem to get tired of it, which is sort of shocking even to me. So, and of course, to support a great cause is also wonderful.
Well, I don't know what we're doing this year because everything is different this year.
Yeah. everything is different everywhere. I'm beginning to think it's just never going back. I've given up. I've given up hope.
I think Zoom is here to stay, don't you think? And I think
I do.
podcasts are here to stay. And, certain things I think are not going back.
It is nice not to have to move around as much throughout the world to see all these different people, which is nice. That's the only perk I found. So a lot of your books have been adapted to movies, film, TV. How does that process fit into your thinking when you're writing the book? Do you visualize scenes at all movie wise, or does it not even come into your consciousness?
Well, the truth is I was a screenwriter for 25 years, some with my own books, but mostly for other people's books. And I think I learned a lot from being a screenwriter, and I learned a lot about telling a story. But when I'm writing, I don't think of it as a movie. I feel like it's something I'm living. I feel like I'm in the book, I'm living it, I am the characters. So I don't really think of it as a movie. Like, would this make a good movie? That's not really the way I think about it.
And I'm sorry, I did know that because you wrote Independence Day, right? The screenplay for that. And yes. Anyway, I'm sorry. I have heard from other authors how critical a skill it is to be able to screenwrite and then turn to know. I feel like there's so many people who write fiction primarily and they're like, well, now I'm going to try screenwriting. But I think there's something in the reverse that's very powerful.
Well, I think it does teach you something about telling a story. And it's really different. It's really different. They're very different things. But I think that it teaches you to know what the heart of your story is. Because I think when you're writing a novel, this happens to me, you can just really get lost and in these kind of offshoots and tangents, and sometimes they're really interesting. But basically with a screenplay, you're pretty much telling a straight on story. And that's helpful, I think.
And so which of your many projects are you going to pick up next?
Oh, well, I'm working on the 4th magic book. And, I thought I was finished until I talked to my editor, but it turns out I'm not finished. So I have some more work on it. But that's been both really fun and really sad because I feel like it's the last book and it's the end of a 25-year relationship with the Owens family. And so, it's been both things. But it's also been a great escape during this time that's such a sad, terrible time.
Which period of the world, like what timeline are you writing that book in?
It's modern times.
Oh, wow. How great. Then you can have a whole box set, sell it, every Halloween.
They're not all published by the same publisher. So
you can't do that?
I can't do that.
Oh.
All of them, yeah.
All right. Well, that's okay. You can make your own.
That's a good idea.
Little gift bags. I don't know. What advice would you have to aspiring authors?
Well, I really think the best advice is to do it every day. And my life is like a little complicated right now, but I always would get up really early, before anybody else was awake, before the phone's ringing, and work for like at least 2 hours so that you get that 2 hours in. So if you get up at 5:30 and start working from 6 or whatever time it is, for me, that always was really helpful. And when I had other jobs, I'd get up, before that other job and write then. I feel like if you write every day, it's not so hard to go back to it. And for me, I always feel like if I stop writing, I'm never going to be able to remember how to do it again. So that's my tip is that, you have to write in order to write.
It's so funny that you've been such a established literary figure and you still are afraid that if you take too long a vacation, you'll lose it.
I am afraid I'm going to lose it. And every time I start a book, I feel like I don't know who wrote the other books. I don't know how they did it. I don't know how to do it. I have to relearn how do you write a book.
And how do you do it? Do you get it all out? Do you ever outline your stories or do you just...
I outline. I make a lot of notes. I do a lot of what's fun for me is world building. I write down lists of plants and list of places. And if I'm, writing about the 60s in New York, all the different music clubs and all the different bookstores that were there. And, just starting to build the world for the characters to move in.
Wow. That's beautiful. I mean, it's amazing that there's a job that allows you to just recreate the universe in which you live every time you open your laptop, right? I know it's just so.
It's a good job, but it's kind of like what you do as a reader is that you leave this world behind and you go into a book and, you escape. And I feel like it's the same thing when you're writing. It's like you're creating this other world, using things that you knew, who you are and how you see the world. But it's just creating something brand new.
And I know the world has changed so much from when you first went to Stanford till now. Is there anything that you miss from the way the publishing industry used to work? Is there
Yeah.
anything you long for?
Well, when I started, like, nobody talked about getting published. Nobody talked about money. It was kind of right after, like, kind of the Ken Kesey era. It was like, yes, you wanted to write a perfect story or something like that, but you didn't think about, but there were no book tours except for people like Norman Mailer or something like that. There were no book tours. And it wasn't about kind of the outside things. It was about the inside, about wanting to be a writer, wanting to tell a story. And I think there's a lot more pressure on people right now. I think it's harder to get published. The publishing houses are conglomerates, and there were a lot more publishing houses. But now there are also different options about publishing in different ways, online or with small presses. So I don't know. I kind of miss that freedom to just kind of do whatever you wanted to. That it was about what you wanted to write, not about what's publishable. And I think now for people starting out, they have to think about both things.
That's true. Sort of the commercialization of even fiction writing. And
yeah.
But I often hear that the best advice is to ignore all of that, as I'm sure you would agree, and just do what's fun for you and what you need to write, or else you can kind of tell when there's no passion in it, right?
Absolutely. I mean, you have to have passion, but I think if you want it to be published, it also can't be like a diary.
Well, right, yeah.
I mean, I always feel like I'm writing for myself, and I'm writing the book for myself. But then it has to be able to somebody else has to read it and have it mean what it means to them.
And is there any innovations that you've particularly adapted well to that you're like, I love X, Y, or Z? I don't even know why I'm asking you these questions. I'm just curious.
I love Google, because if, like, I don't know what year something happened in and I'm in the middle of writing, it's like I don't have to, like, go through all my books. I can just, like, find out what year, the Salem witch trials ended, just real quick. It's very helpful. Also, it just took when I started, people were typing, and it took a long time. Every time you rewrote, you rewrote the whole manuscript, really. I think it was kind of good practice, actually, but it just was time consuming.
I am old enough that I used to use a typewriter for my school assignments and have my mother, help me and have to restart in the whiteout. And oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I'm like, the idea that you can even produce as clear a thought when there's so much on the line, right? You have to start over again, as opposed to now it's like, I'll change that, right? I don't know.
I actually think that's good for writers. And I tend to still do that. Like, when you start at the beginning again, instead of just moving things around the way we can do now, it gives a different rhythm, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, it makes for a different kind of revision. I mean, I think sometimes when I'm involved in a program for young writers at Adelphi University out on Long Island every summer. And sometimes I think, they really think that writers just write it down and that's it. And that's not it at all. I mean, most people have to do lots of revisions and lots of changes. And I think that's just a good thing to know when you're starting out, that everybody does it.
Yes. Wait for those comments.
Yeah.
in Google Docs, and then everything, melds together. Your love of Google. There you go. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for chatting with me today. I'm sorry I had such random questions, but I was really curious about sort of like the lifespan of being an author for so many different periods of time. And as the industry has changed and you've stayed just as current, it's really awesome. So I don't know. It was a unique vantage point. So thanks.
Thanks for chatting with me today.
All right. Thank you. All right. Well, have a great day. Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks again to Audible for being this week's sponsor. Everybody go to audible.com/Zibby and you get a month free of Audible on me. Thanks for listening to this episode of Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens and at Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Also sign up for my newsletter at zibbyowens.com and sign up for my virtual book club and meet lots of authors on Zoom every other week. Thanks so much to Steve and Ryan at Texture Sound for the sound editing. And thank you to Morning Moon Productions for providing this fantastic intro and outro music.